Good morning. I'm suffering from allergies, so if I start crying or coughing, I'm not sick. This morning I'm reading from the book of Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 to 43. Now, when Jesus had crossed over again by boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered to him, and he was by the sea. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name. And when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." So Jesus went with him, and a great multitude followed him and thronged him. Now, a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years. All of us women out there can understand how horrible that would be. And had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. And when she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be well." Immediately the fountain of blood was dried up, and she felt in her body she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" But his disciples said to him, "You see the multitude thronging you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house and said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" As soon as the teacher heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult of those who wept and wailed loudly. When he came in, he said to them, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." Oh, they ridiculed him. But when he put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him and entered where the child was lying. Then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cumi," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the little girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age. And they were overcome with great amazement. But he commanded them strictly that no one should know it, and then said something should be given to her to eat. Praise be to God.
This section of Mark, I enjoy it because Mark is a storyteller. And he lays it out. The passage from last week where it was, I don't think we did it last week here. It was the healing of the man on the other side of the lake in the Decapolis. And now we have another detailed story, but actually it's two stories. So let's look at that. Now this section of Mark has been called the St. Jude section. Now you may be familiar with St. Jude. He's the patron saint of desperate causes, lost causes, hopeless causes. That's why Danny Thomas named his hospital for children as St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Now, Jesus has just crossed the lake where he healed a man that was possessed by a legion of demons. Now, in this section, we have Jairus' daughter, who is at the point of death, and then the woman with the issue of blood. These are all seemingly hopeless cases. Something else that Mark does here is that he sandwiches two stories together. And this is they call this a Markism, or a Marcanian. I don't know why, but that's what they call it. It's a literary technique that Mark uses pretty frequently. And even though these two stories could stand alone, and in the other Gospels they do, Mark intends for them to be read and told together. So that is our task for this morning. First we have Jairus. The text tells us that he was a leader in the synagogue. That's rather vague, actually. Jairus could have been a cantor, a hazan. He could have been the leader of the board of elders. He could have been a Pharisee. It's possible he could have been a rabbi, but I rather doubt that, or Mark would tell us. But Jairus knew Jesus' reputation, and he probably knew that Jesus had just crossed the lake. Mark then tells that Jairus did something that nobody in his position should ever do. And behold, one of the rulers of the synagogue came, Jairus by name, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet and begged him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter lies at the point of death. Come, lay your hands on her, that she may be healed, and she will live." Jairus is a man of position. He's got a reputation to protect. He's got an income to protect. But this little girl of his means more to him than any of that. Remember in John 3, Nicodemus came to Jesus by night because he didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be recognized. He didn't want to lose anything. Jairus is a man who is desperate to save his little girl. So look what he does here. He falls at Jesus' feet. Now, as a practicing Jew, or what makes this even more of a faux pas, especially for a man of Jairus' position, is for him to fall at someone's feet. For Jairus to bow, or kneel, or genuflect before someone, is to acknowledge that that person is divine, or even God. And this, of course, was forbidden by Jewish law. This matters not to Jairus. Sometimes this is a reflection of the cost of following Jesus. In Jairus' case, the cost was great, but that was nothing compared to the life of his little girl. His daughter did not have just a fever or was extremely ill. The Greek root word here is eschatos. It's the same as is found in eschatology, or the end times, or death. She's not just on her deathbed, but she's literally in the process of dying. That labored respiratory breathing, the heavy breathing, the heartbeat, the passing of life out of a human body. So Jesus went with him. And maybe for the first time since Jairus got up that morning, he felt a little optimistic. Maybe a little relief that Jesus is going to cure his daughter. And the text tells us a great multitude followed and thronged him. But then, verse 25, a certain woman Well, this poor lady had a bleeding discharge for 12 years. Now, what does this mean? Aside from the medical condition, where she's having a bloody discharge, this is also a societal and a religious condition. With her condition, she is ritually unclean. She is not allowed to go to temple or synagogue. She could not practice her faith, and anyone who touched her would also be considered unclean until sunset. If you look at Leviticus chapter 15, not now, when you get home, you can see just how serious this condition is for a woman of Jewish faith. The text tells us she had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things at the hands of the physicians. She spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. It's not that the physicians weren't trying to make her worse. They just did not know how to cure her. This woman had been ostracized. She has been kept from society and even family contact. She has not been allowed to worship God or even visit the temple. What did she have to lose by touching the hem of Jesus' robe? She had plenty of reasons to be terrified. She was desperate. Desperate for help, desperate for healing. She wasn't supposed to be in the crowd. This woman, when she heard about Jesus, she said to herself, "If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well." That's what she did, and she was. Okay, picture in your mind Jesus with Jairus. They're probably walking at a brisk pace to get to Jairus' house, when all of a sudden Jesus stops, turns and said, "Who touched me?" Jairus is probably getting a little upset at this point because they're on the way to his house to heal his daughter. And the rabbi stops and says, "Who touched me?" The disciple said, "Master, there's a whole crowd around you. Everybody's touching you. What do you mean you want to know who touched you?" What we have here is an indication of Jesus' humanity and his deity. This is an example of vera homo and vera deus, truly human and truly God. We can see the example of it, but if we try to explain it, I would always get in trouble. Nobody has really ever been able to explain the Trinity, something that we have to take on faith. Jesus was aware that the healing power had gone out of him, but he did not have the omniscient power to know to whom that power went or who touched him. The certain woman had backed off. She knew she had been healed. She could feel that she had been healed. But now she might be found out. And all the while, Jairus is probably standing off to the side, pacing back and forth. He wants to get Jesus back on the track and going to his house. Then at verse 33, we see the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. She just didn't say, gloss it over, and I've had this issue, and I'm going to... She told him the whole truth of all 12 years. She did not leave anything out. She told every detail. Now look what Jesus says to her. He tells her that his clothing has special magical powers that heal her. Of course not. Jesus lifts her up, looks her in the eye, and he says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." What did he mean by that? Her faith had no intrinsic power to heal, but her faith was the instrumental cause of her healing. Her faith was in Jesus Christ, that he could heal her. Jesus says it was the woman's faith in him that had healed her. Now he says, go in peace and be healed. I think this was so much more than an ordinary valediction of goodbye. This woman had not known peace in 12 years. Go now. Not in fear, not in trembling, not in misery. Go in peace. By this time, Jairus has been standing off on the side, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Now some people from Jairus' house came and tells Jairus, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Jesus had just finished talking to the woman, then he hears this. And he tells Jairus, do not be afraid. Only believe. When Jesus and Jairus get to the house, there is a crowd there. They are weeping and they are wailing and they're playing funeral instruments and mourning. Of course, these are the professional mourners. It was Jewish customs that whenever there's a death, that they would hire mourners to wail and cry. And the more money you had, the more money you had, the more Thank you. Act like I haven't read it before. There were a lot of mourners. There I say. And Jesus, see here, I lost my place because I couldn't say mourners. All right. They get to the house, and Jesus says, why make this commotion and weep? The child's not dead, but sleeping. Now, these were professional mourners. They knew death. They knew when a kid was dead, or anybody was dead. They started laughing at Jesus. These professional mourners came to be amateur laughers. They knew that the girl was not alive. Jesus puts out all the mourners. He gets them out of the way, and then from his disciples, he has Peter, James, John, his inner circle. Jairus and his wife. They go into the girl's room. Then Jesus says in Aramaic, Talitha Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. The text tells us that immediately she got up and walked. The text also adds that she was 12 years old. We have now seen several clues as to how these two healing stories are interrelated. The woman with the issue of blood had been suffering for 12 years. The child was 12 years old. Both the woman and Jairus came, sought him out, and fell at his feet. Jesus should be, but is not, made unclean, either by being touched by the woman or by touching the dead girl. Either way, in Jewish law, that would make him unclean. Both situations appeared hopeless. Dead people just usually don't get up and walk. The person from Jairus' house, we're not told, but it could be a family member, a house servant, family friend, tells Jairus, why trouble the teacher anymore? When we pray, we see other people's prayers get answered, but not ours. Why bother God anymore? Is it just hopeless? There's just no point anymore. Everything I feared would happen has happened. Why trouble the teacher? Why trouble God anymore? And then we have what Jesus says to Jairus and to us. Don't be afraid. Only believe. And Jesus gets rid of the negative talkers. Gets them out of the house. He takes the little girl's hand and says, "Arise." There's power in the resurrection. There's power over death. There's power over lost causes. Let me share a short excerpt from a song by Toby Mac. I heard you pray in Jesus' name. It may be midday or midnight. It's never early. It's never late. You're going to stand by what he claimed. I've lived long enough to say, help is on the way, round in the corner. Help is on the way, coming for you. Help is on the way. I've lived enough life to say, help is on the way. Sometimes it's days, sometimes it's years. Some face a lifetime of falling tears. But he's in the darkness. He's in the cold. Just like the morning, he always shows. Do we trouble God any further? Just like he did with the little girl, Jesus takes our hand and says, arise. Do not fear. Only believe. There's power in the resurrection. Power over death. Power over lost cause.